Hello, all, and welcome back. In our previous session, we discussed different trauma-informed advocacy approaches. In Module 4, we will begin to explore how to build nonviolent, healthy communication opportunities for all parties. This module is designed to enhance individuals' understanding and application of effective communication techniques through trauma contexts. Individuals will explore the principles of communication, develop key communication skills, and learn how to overcome common barriers. Through a blend of knowledge and practical exercises, our hope is that individuals will gain the confidence and competency needed to communicate clearly, persuasively, and empathetically. By the end of this module, we will be equipped with essential skills and knowledge needed to communicate effectively for trauma in a variety of other settings. They will be able to convey their ideas clearly, listen actively, provide and receive feedback constructively, and overcome barriers to communication, leading to more successful and meaningful interactions. So what is communication? Communication within trauma domains, particularly in trauma-informed care, is characterized by sensitivity, empathy, safety, and trust. Trauma can deeply affect how individuals process and respond to communication. So it's crucial to adapt approaches to minimize that re-traumatization and foster that healing. Here's what communication looks like in two trauma domains. First, we'll look at empathetic engagement. When communicating with individuals affected by trauma, empathetic engagement is essential. This means being attuned to their emotions, showing understanding, and validating their experiences. The second domain is listening to hear and understand rather than to speak and respond. Active listening involves giving the person your full attention, acknowledging their feelings, and showing that you are truly hearing them without interrupting or imposing your own judgment. We want to create a safe space for communication. Creating a safe space means fostering an environment where individuals feel physically, emotionally, and psychologically secure. It's a place where people are free to express themselves, share their experiences, and engage without fear of judgment, harm, or discrimination. Safe spaces are essential in trauma-informed care, in education, activism, and other various contexts to encourage openness, healing, and support. Key elements of what it means to create a safe space are by creating physical and emotional safety and non-threatening language. Physical and emotional safety means communication in trauma domains, prioritizing and creating a sense of safety both physically and emotionally. This involves ensuring that the environment is calm, non-threatening, and free from distractions. It also means using non-threatening language. Using language that avoids placing blame or making that person feel judged. We should instead focus on creating a respectful and open dialogue that encourages trust and reduces that anxiety. In a safe space, individuals feel confident that they won't be criticized, shamed, or ridiculed for their thoughts, emotions, or experiences. Everyone is encouraged to share their perspectives without fear of rejection. A safe space fosters that empathy, where feelings and experience are acknowledged and validated. It's important to affirm the emotions and challenges individuals face without minimizing or dismissing them. Trauma-informed communication gives individuals choices, allowing them to feel a sense of control over the conversation. This could mean offering options about how or when to communicate or what topics to address. It's important to respect personal boundaries and be mindful of how much the individual is comfortable sharing. Pushing someone to disclose too much information too quickly can also re-traumatize them. So in essence, creating a safe space is about building trust, respecting boundaries, and providing an inclusive, non-judgmental environment where individuals feel empowered to express themselves and participate freely. It's a proactive and intentional effort to ensure that everyone feels secure, that they feel supported, and that they feel valued. We will stop by here on this side to explore building trust and transparency through communication. The two domains within this are clear and honest communication and trust building. Transparency is key in trauma domains. It explains what will happen next, who is involved, what to expect, using straightforward language and being clear. This reduces that uncertainty, which can be triggered for individuals with trauma histories. Building trust takes time. We try to always be consistent, following through on our promises, and communicating clearly about our intentions. This helps create a safe, predictable environment that encourages individuals to open up. We approach every conversation with an attitude of non-judgment. Individuals who have experienced trauma may fear being judged or misunderstood, so it's essential to convey that their feelings and experiences are valid and acceptable. Within our roles in CTIP, we are careful and try to avoid language that suggests fault, blame, or even shame. Trauma survivors often carry feelings of guilt or self-blame, and it's important to communicate in a way that reassures them that they are not responsible for what happened to them. Even in our presentations, we try to use language that acknowledges the impact of trauma without triggering negative emotions and avoiding graphics or overly direct language that may cause distress. We focus instead on the strengths and the resilience of our teams and others by being able to highlight the individual's ability to overcome those challenges that they're facing, rather than only emphasizing the trauma itself. As we work to build collaboration between different groups of individuals and communities, we know that we must take a lens of cultural competence and humility. Culturally responsive communication recognizes that trauma can manifest differently across cultures. We strengthen our efforts by being open to understanding how cultural backgrounds, race, ethnicity, gender identity, and other factors influence a person's experiences of trauma. Even well-intentioned phrases like, "it's not that bad," or "you'll get over it," can be invalidating and harmful. Our approach to communication is with humility and being able to acknowledge that we may not fully understand the individual's cultural context or their personal experiences, but we are willing to learn from them and adapt our communication style accordingly. Trauma survivors often struggle with feelings of shame, guilt, or fear. Validating their emotions and saying things like, "it's understandable that you feel that way," helps normalize their reaction and reduce feelings of isolation. Trauma-informed communication involves being aware of potential triggers, such as certain words, topics, or behaviors that may cause distress. Be prepared to respond compassionately if someone becomes triggered during a conversation. In sessions like these, if we are discussing a difficult or potentially triggering topic, we may frequently check in with the individual or individuals to gauge their comfort level and offer breaks if needed. As we continue to build this movement, and networking with community partners will be our greatest asset. Although we look at the challenges from a broader perspective, those facing and going through the trauma will have a better understanding of the deep impact and a better sense of what needs to be done to create trauma-informed awareness within their community. Instead, we take a collaborative approach that allows us to share that power with those impacted by trauma. Instead of telling the individual what they need, we have to work collaboratively to develop those solutions that are needed. We engage with those individuals within the decision-making process, and we encourage them to express their preferences and their needs. We avoid that hierarchy approach to communication. Trauma survivors often feel disempowered, so it's important to emphasize shared decision-making and mutual respect. We know that not everyone will agree with the decisions that are made, so we come prepared for strong emotional reactions such as anger, sadness, or frustration, and we approach these emotions with calmness and compassion without taking them personally or becoming defensive. If a person becomes overwhelmed or distressed, we look for ways to help de-escalate the situation and help guide the conversation back to a safe and calm place. After having a particular difficult conversation, it's helpful to check in with the individual to see how they're feeling by offering that continued support and asking if they need additional resources or follow-up discussions. Trauma-informed communication often includes providing individuals with access to resources such as counseling, support groups, or crisis hotlines if they need further assistance. Within trauma domains, communication is not just about conveying information. It's about establishing trust, offering support, and creating a safe environment where individuals can express themselves without fear or judgment or re-traumatization. We understand it is important to build coalitions that help inform individuals of our message. We also understand the frustration when we have setbacks or those who don't fully understand the work that we are doing. However, we must help spread the word of trauma-informed advocacy and nonviolent ways of communicating. Nonviolent communication, or NVC, in trauma spaces is a compassionate and respectful approach that focuses on the understanding the needs, the emotion, and perspectives of others without causing that harm, that judgment, or blame. It's a communication style that really fosters trust and empathy and connection, which are vital in trauma-informed environments. Nonviolent communication begins by observing the situation without attaching judgment or assumptions. In trauma spaces, this means focusing on what happened, not assigning blame or making evaluations. Nonviolent communication in trauma spaces focuses on fostering that empathy, on understanding and connecting while prioritizing safety and respect. It avoids judgment, it avoids blame and criticism, and instead centers on the needs and feelings of all parties involved. So by adopting an approach rooted in empathy, compassion, and collaboration, nonviolent communication creates an environment where trauma survivors feel heard, where they feel validated, and where they feel supported within their journey to healing. So let's work together to create a comprehensive communication guide that addresses the key points of developing an elevator pitch and a story of self with special consideration for you as you who have experienced trauma. We can start with the following 5 things that you see on the screen. First, a framework for understanding and developing a personal narrative. 2, creating a step-by-step guide on crafting a story of self. 3, making sure that we have practical tips for developing and delivering an elevator pitch. 4, providing that emotional preparation and self-care advice. And 5, making sure that we have resources to help support ourselves and others. So how do you find your voice? Every young person has a powerful story to tell. For those who have experienced trauma, finding that courage to share that story can be both challenging and transformative. This guide is designed to help you develop 2 critical communication tools. 1, your elevator pitch, and 2, your story itself. These tools will empower you to become a confident advocate during your personal experiences and to a force for understanding, healing, and for change. So what is a story of self? A story of self is more than just a recounting of events. It's a deeply personal narrative that highlights your unique experiences, that demonstrates your resilience, that connects your personal journey to broader social context, and that inspires and educates others. Your story is not about dwelling on a pain, but about showcasing that strength, that growth, and that hope. An elevator pitch is a brief, compelling summary of who you are, what you care about, and the change that you want to create. It's called an elevator pitch because it should be concise enough to share during a short elevator ride, which is typically about 30 to 60 seconds. So how do you craft that story in that elevator pitch? Well, first, through reflection and personal exploration. Before you begin writing, take time for introspection. Think about what experiences have helped shape you. What challenges have you overcome? What are your core values? And what change do you want to see in the world? Writing this out in journaling can be an excellent way to explore these questions. And remember, this process can be emotionally challenging, so be gentle with yourself and seek that support if you need it. Step 2, how do you structure your story? A powerful story of self typically follows a framework of past, present, future. First, by starting off with the past, where you came from and the challenges you face. And then the present, how these experiences have shaped your current perspective. And then the future, the vision and the change you want to create. An example of this would be when I was at what age, I experienced and talk about the challenge. Through this experience, I learned and give some insight to what that would be. Now I want to, instead of goal or vision, and by what date or time that you want to see that achieved. Step 3, when crafting your story and developing your elevator pitch. Your elevator pitch should be a concentrated version of your story of self. And it should be clear and concise. It should spark the interest of other individuals. It should communicate what your passion is. And it should invite other individuals for future conversation. An example of this would be, hi, I'm, and state your name. After experiencing, and give some brief context of what's that you've experienced. I realized, give some key insight of what you've experienced and what you've realized from the past. Now I'm passionate about, and that's where you talk about what your goal is, what your mission is. And I'm working to, and discuss some specific action or some change that you want to see made. But also when developing your story, be prepared for that emotional preparation. What does sharing your story look, sound, or feel like? Sharing a story of trauma can be emotionally intense, so preparation is key. Practice your story in safe environments. Make sure you have a strong support system. Know what your boundaries are. And it's okay to stop or adjust your narrative if you're feeling overwhelmed. Here are some key delivery techniques to help you with your delivery. The 3 that we'll discuss briefly are body language, voice tone, and connection to engagement. First, body language. Maintain that comfortable eye contact. Use open, confident posture, and speak at a steady, clear pace. 2, that voice and tone. Speak from a place of strength, not victimhood. Use a conversational, authentic tone. Modulate your volume and speed for emphasis. And then connection and engagement. Use those storytelling techniques like vivid descriptions. Show, don't just tell. Be authentic. Be open to being vulnerable, but you also don't have to be too graphic. Next is selecting your audience or the venue where you'll be speaking. Know who you are speaking to and where to speak. Not every story needs to be shared everywhere. Consider the purpose of sharing, the audience readiness of your story, your personal comfort level, and what potential impact that it might have. Safe spaces to do this are within support groups, youth advocacy organizations, counseling settings, or trusted educational environments. Protect yourself, protect your energy, seek that support. You're not obligated to share your entire story, and it's okay to have different versions for different contexts. Prioritize your mental and emotional well-being first. Consider trauma-informed counseling, support groups, trusted mentors or advocates, and mental health resources when sharing your story. Your story is a powerful tool for change. By thoughtfully crafting and sharing your experiences, you can heal, you can educate, you can inspire, you can create meaningful connections, and you can drive that social understanding. Remember, advocacy is a journey, so be patient and be kind to yourself. Now we will move forward and we will take some time to do an activity. What do you think are key contributors to communicating? What are the outcomes? We're going to write out some strategies of communication for trauma, and then we're going to share with a partner, and then we'll share back out to the larger group. This will take about 20 to 25 minutes to get through this. Take your time. We'll pause the video here. Welcome back. So how do we ensure explicit, clear, comprehensive communication? Ensuring this communication in trauma spaces is essential for fostering that safety, that trust, and understanding. Trauma survivors may have heightened sensitivity to ambiguity or miscommunication, which can trigger anxiety or feelings of insecurity. Some ways to ensure that communication is effective in trauma-informed spaces include being explicitly clear and comprehensive. We create a trauma-informed environment that fosters that trust, that minimizes that anxiety, and empowering individuals to engage with confidence. This approach reduces misunderstanding, it prevents re-traumatization, and it helps trauma survivors feel heard, respected, and supported. Now, as we sit back and we reflect, let's think about what communication style works best for you. How do you communicate effectively with others? And in what ways can communication help you grow your experience to have discussions with individuals at all levels? We'll pause here and let the group have a brief discussion. And welcome back. Within the trauma-informed umbrella, for instance, some of our advocates have real interest and expertise as well in transforming our system, and others may gravitate toward transforming the school system, while others may primarily extend their efforts and energy toward behavioral health, so on and so forth. Ultimately, what we find to be the most important part of making these decisions is that the cause or issue or solution that you choose is one that you are passionate about. That is what we have noticed really helps with sustaining your energy throughout the many twists and turns of advocacy work. Once you have a general sense of what you want to work on, that may be enough to give you a direction to go in the way of information gathering without needing to take an extra step to get even more specific. At other times, though, when thinking about what is needed in advocacy strategy, breaking a more general topic or issue you want to pay attention to down to identify a very specific issue to target can be helpful. These prompts that you see on the slide can be a starting point for thinking more deeply about what that might look like. As you're thinking about the issue you want to target, it can also be helpful to really consider what factors make a policy solution as opposed to some other types of solution, a good fit to address your issue. In the context of us here with CTIP, we often look at how a policy intervention can serve to really optimize the relationship between social environments and well-being as a guidepost. Once you are able to identify how a policy solution is and how to address that issue, consider what the policy lever is or what sets that policy. This is something important for setting advocacy target, something we'll talk more in depth about later. But also, taking a look at what might happen if we do nothing. Maybe the issue will get worse overall, and there's evidence for that, which can be important. So too can considering the possibility of other factors that changing policy might have, including whether certain individuals, populations, groups, institutions, or systems may be impacted adversely or disproportionately. And you will undoubtedly be thinking more deeply about this moving forward, but as a preliminary consideration, it can be helpful to inform your thinking. We'll be getting into more formalized research in a moment, but before you move into information gathering, it can be helpful to look at high level think about what kinds of evidence may help you better understand the issue as an initial brainstorm to guide you. Additionally, many issues are more complex than they may appear at first, and as this iceberg image depicts, sometimes to see the real issue, you have to go deep below the surface. For instance, if you are looking at increasing in petty crime and substance abuse use during times of national socioeconomic challenges at the surface level and jump right from there to building a policy solution, you may miss the underlying issue that individuals between the ages of 18 and 30 are unable to find secure jobs that pay a living wage. And even if you stop them, you may miss noticing that this is disproportionately impacting BIPOC folks, which may bring you to overlook stats and reveal injustice and inequality embedded within these designs and implementation of labor laws, insufficient investment in primary education in marginalized communities, and there's a lack of affordable housing in urban areas, and so on and so forth, right? The solution to each of these levels of analysis will look very differently and will have a different impact. So really going deep to consider what's the issue you're actually trying to solve through change, and what is an important piece of this work to do up front. Your issue analysis will be stronger for recognizing how systemic and institutional forces influence policy choices in the administration of services and benefits that contribute substantially to pressing problems that are often otherwise attributed to individual. So ultimately, if the issue you are initially looking at depends on another issue being resolved, you may find it useful to recalibrate a bit so you can set actionable, achievable, and meaningful goals. And speaking of goals, goals are ultimately what help transform good intentions into impactful action. The first general consideration is to find the North Star. With so many different dynamics and demands involved in advocacy, it can be very easy to be pulled into a lot of directions that can impede your change efforts. Keeping your eyes on your North Star, or basically what based on your mission, values, purpose, and perspective, is the high headline of what needs to be accomplished. It is not uncommon for well-intentioned and energized advocates to set broad aspirational goals, but also overlooking the incremental gains that are significant wins in their own right. To help avoid this situation, it tends to be helpful to break the bigger goal down by setting short, immediate, and long-term goals that cascade and connect, and where you're able to add up in ways that measure based on that North Star. As we've discussed before, systems transformation and policy change tend to move slowly, and setting these incremental goals as you build and sustain your influence in the policy process can provide clarity and direction that helps you maintain that momentum toward your policy solution being enacted, and also can help advocates sustain a sense of achievement and remain motivated. Depending on whether you are working with a group of advocates with a particular structure, you may also want to consider setting overarching goals for the entire group, while also setting some separate area-focused goals for various task streams, committees. Given the unpredictability of the political environment and the many factors that might affect policy change, it can also be helpful to consider what goals you have in addition to getting legislation passed or thwarting bad legislation. This is going deeper than just, well, my goal is to get the bill passed and then have it enshrined in law. Maybe you want to raise public awareness about your issue and public solution, or perhaps you want to have X amount of individuals make Y amount of calls to their legislator by Z time frame, or get a certain amount of news outlets to write about your issue or policy solution. These goals can make an important impact on getting legislation passed as well. We also want to uplift the significance of collaborating in this part of the process. Our advocacy modeling the model speaks to cultivating authentic collaboration aligned with the values and principles of a trauma-informed approach for advocacy work, or information on what this could look like. It's important to know upfront whether you currently have the capacity, the systems, and processes needed to achieve each goal, or if there's something related to capacity building that needs to take place prior to the achievement that may then itself become a goal. Which brings me to the importance of keeping in mind that you will continue to revisit and reflect upon these goals, and that you will likely need to add some additional goals, or at the very least, edit your original goals throughout the process. It is also important not to get too oversaturated with goals, and we have found it particularly useful to prioritize just a few goals containing different pathways to achieve, so there is flexibility to pursue different opportunities and respond to those curveballs. And finally, being action, strengths, and solution oriented in setting goals can, in our experience, similarly keep advocates interested, motivated, and anchored to the trauma-informed model. So in addition to highlighting the urgency of the problems that exist and putting equal or even more focus on how making meaningful progress towards improving those situations through solutions that build a more resilient and healthier future for all is achievable in whatever context you are engaging in, advocacy is a strategy for individuals to consider. In terms of the actual framework for setting these goals, let's take a look at SMARTY goals. You may have heard of SMART goals, and that framework is an effective and concrete approach to driving results, but without an explicit equity and inclusion component. Goals are much less likely to produce better outcomes from marginalized communities where it doesn't address disparities in support and belonging. But by incorporating equity and inclusion into your SMART goals with the intentionality by instead making SMART, i.e. SMART-E goals, you can make sure your advocacy work demonstrates commitment to equity and inclusion anchored by those tangible and actionable steps. So starting with the S, this stands for specific, which captures the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, and how for your proposed solution. The M is for measurable, which invites you to consider how you will know when you have reached those goals. This is where you will likely want to identify some key tactics you will use and benchmarks or metrics you will need to hit to achieve those goals. The A is for achievable, which encourages you to anchor yourself in a realistic sense of hope by asking yourself what is possible. This can be a bit of a balancing act since it is important that this goal be challenging to the degree that accomplishment would mean significant and meaningful purposes. And it also is important to consider feasibility such that your goal isn't so challenging based on resources, capacity, and other factors that could generate disappointment rather than feelings of efficacy and success. The R is for relevant, which asks the question, how does this goal address the real issue, including the stuff underneath the iceberg? The T is for time bound, which asks you to consider when the actions needed to achieve your goal have to happen. And that brings us to the I, for inclusive, which presents an opportunity to consider how you can bring traditionally excluded individuals and groups into the process, into activities, decisions, and policymaking in a way that shares that power and honors that lived experience. It is important to note that there can be a fine line between inclusion and tokenism, and the difference is about power. A distinction here is that diversity is about who is present at the table, while integrating that inclusion into your goals goes a step further to consider who is empowered to make those decisions or participate in a meaningful way. And so in this part of setting SMARTY goals, you might think about how, if you were able to add an outcome or activity related to a specific trauma-impacted community, will achieving this goal help build power for the community? And finally, the E, which stands for equitable and invites you to take a look at how your goal addresses how you intend to address systemic injustices, inequality, or oppression. This is a spot where you will likely want to examine whether there might be any unintentional impacts along lines of power and identity within your goals. We would encourage you to consider how inequality or exclusion might show up and for whom, and seek those opportunities to share that power and to shrink those disparities, both in the outcomes and advocacy efforts that you're engaging in. Collectively, we have an opportunity to create a better world that reflects the best of who we are as humans, and Smarty goals can help us achieve that vision. And so, as mentioned on the last slide, and as will be discussed in other modules, authentic engagement, inclusion, and collaboration with people and communities impacted by your advocacy efforts, conducted in a way that shares that power, is crucial. And the intentionality of the process itself can help shrink those disparities and lead to more equitable outcomes. Here are some examples that demonstrate the transformation from a SMART goal into a SMARTY goal. Critically examine your goals and use frameworks that promote justice and equity, which will generally ensure that they consider important topics of trauma-informed advocacy like social justice, fairness, equal rights, consistency, and dismantling oppression systems and solving public health problems. As we bring this module to an end, we invite you to consider, based on what we've discussed so far, how might you pare down your chosen issue to its essence and set out that communication, one SMARTY goal related to advocating around your issue. We want you to reflect on many different ways that individuals are impacted by trauma and how you can help through strong discussions of communication. Building trauma-informed communication means creating a style of interaction that recognizes and understands and responds to the impact of trauma on individuals. This approach promotes emotional safety, trust, and empowerment. By implementing steps to become more trauma-aware in the way you communicate, you can create trauma-informed communication that builds that trust, that fosters that healing, and empowers individuals to express themselves in a safe and supportive environment. We are grateful for your work and for spending this time with us, and we're looking forward to working with you and seeing you at the next modules.